Well, hello. I'm Emenaker, professor of political science at College of the Redwoods in Northern California. Thank you for joining me for part one of the American Political Science Association's two-part webinar. This series features 3 videos that showcase community college faculty's approaches to online education. In this third video, I'm going to discuss a few teaching resources that I use in my American Political Science courses as well as my constitutional law courses. Please be sure to watch my 2 colleagues' other videos before joining us for the live webinar in early January 2021. Before I jump into showcasing the resources that I use in my class, I want to talk about some of the principles I use to design some of these ideas. It's nice to have ready off-the-shelf assignments, some of which we'll provide here and you'll have links to through the APSA website, but it's also helpful to understand how do I tweak those assignments so they work for me. And these are some of the ideas that I've come up with that help me think about how I'm going to design assignments for the course. Most importantly, I like to think about it as it's the medium is the education. So borrowing from that famous idea of the medium is the message, here I try to think of the medium as the education. And it's the idea of thinking beyond the discussion post. So often what I see in online education is this very standard, every student has to do 1 discussion post and then you have to reply to 2 students. And I find those to be tedious to grade, and I'm not sure that much learning happens from those. Yes, I do use those in my class, but I want to think beyond them and try to do more as well. So one of the ways I try to do that is to think about how do we use the medium to our advantage? How do we use online education in a way that we can design assignments that work particularly well for the medium? So one thing I think is teaching research skills. You already have the students sitting in front of a laptop or a computer of some sort where they've got access to the World Wide Web, they've got access to your school library, and all of these research things are there. How do we make use of that in our assignments in a way that will be even easier for them, perhaps, than if they were in a face-to-face class? I like to think of it, how do we coordinate group assignments? I really like group assignments. I use them in my face-to-face classes. But oftentimes, at a community college that's mostly a commuter school, it's tough for students to meet with other students. But the online environment allows some coordination that I've been able to institutionalize in ways that I could not in my face-to-face. Students are already online, so they can use Zoom and they can use other tools where they can collaborate across space that they could not necessarily in my face-to-face classes. I also find that the online medium allows for one-on-one meetings. That because I may not have a lot of synchronous classes where I have to be there at a particular time, I have more time during the week where I can have one-on-one meetings with students. And many of my students at my school, being a commuter school again, they aren't able to make it to my office hours at particular times, but they can Zoom in. And so trying to use this and trying to come up with more assignments that use one-on-one meetings and developing personalized assignments for students. I try to use peer review analysis stuff in an online environment. Oftentimes when students approach me in my face-to-face classes and say, I don't understand why I got a C on this, I'll often try to find an old assignment that I've saved and be like, here, look at this and see how this assignment meets the goals and compare your assignment to this one. But that's so much easier to do in an online environment where I'll often make the students post all of your responses to this news article here. And they can go through and see what the other students in the class are doing. And I can easily then point out, check out what this student is doing and see how it compares to what you've done. And students are often able to then compare their work to others and see what's expected of them in a way that they may not have been able to simply from the rubric or the guidelines of the assignment. I often like to think of online education as a way to reclaim my semester. At graduate school, like many of you, my semesters were 13 weeks. They were relatively short. And then I showed up in the California community college system, and we have these 16-week semesters, which I think are really long, and I struggle with how to use them. And we don't have a reading week or a gap week or a dead week that many schools do. But with online education, I'm able to institutionalize some of this. Right? There's a pressure in a face-to-face class where I have to show up twice a week for an hour and a half each time to do something during this time period. With an online class, I can say, this week, you're merely going to work on this assignment or study this item. And I can institutionalize dead weeks and study periods and allow people to work on projects that maybe are semester-long projects that are much harder to do when they have to show up all the time to particular classes and they have to be there and I have to show what's happening during the class and I have to make it feel worth it to the students that drove there. Here, I don't have that pressure and I can reclaim my semester and I can put dead weeks in, I can give them a week to get their books, I can give a week around the midterm, and I can give a week for a dead week where they can review for the final and so forth. I also, during my face-to-face classes, often like to do updates to my syllabus, but that's much harder. In the online environment where I can post things, I can grab articles and I can have to be announced listed in the syllabus, and I'll have an article about elections coming up and then it comes out. And that's another way that the online environment, I think, lends itself to certain advantages that we can institutionalize. So let me show a couple of assignments that I use that use some of these principles. So one of them is when I'm teaching Congress in my Introduction to American Politics course, I will send the students, as this assignment shows here, and this is also being posted on the APSA website, go to the government website for the U.S. House. Go to the government website for the U.S. Senate. Look up who your member of Congress is. Look up which committees they're on. Look up what those committees do. Look up what the Speaker of the House does. Right? I'll also, because I'm in California, send them to the California State Assembly and the California State Senate. I'll send them to the websites of their representatives where they can look and see what those folks are doing. I'll also, as part of this assignment, send them to Open Secrets, which is this great website that lists who's donating to campaigns, and I'll ask them, find out who are the major donors to your representative. Who are the 5 major industries that are donating? Who are the 5 major individuals? How much money is being raised? We often present this information in textbooks, but making students go out and find it themselves. Or even sometimes, here's this graph in the textbook that talks about how much funding is happening in campaigns. Go to the Open Secrets website and see what this campaign cycle does and how it compares from the graph in the textbook. How would you update the graph on page 183? I have a similar assignment like this for polling, where I will send students to the Pew Research Center or Gallup or 538 or some of these other websites where they get to learn about polling and how polling works. One thing we often, when we try to teach, it's talked about a lot in introductory U.S. government textbooks, is trying to get people to understand sample size and how can we talk to 1,000 people and get a random sample that will accurately portray what the entire country thinks. I'll give them the example of doing this of, okay, what percentage of the population voted for Joe Biden? What percentage of the population voted for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton? What did the average of the polls say they were likely to get? Wow, look how close this is. The average of the polls said Biden was going to win by 7.5%. At this point, it looks like he's about 4.5%, 5% ahead. That's pretty close. And try to get them to understand. Look at the polls themselves. Look at how many people they talked about. Let's talk about margin of error. What does this mean about the polls? And so giving them a sense of doing this. I'll also have them look up at Pew has a really great research center where it'll tell them their methodology. So I'll have them find the methodology. I'll have them find a couple of articles from the Gallup website where it uses numbers to tell stories. And I'll have them talk about the different graphs. And let's look at this story, for example, about same-sex marriage. And look at the difference between how men and women view the issue, or how 18 to 29-year-olds view it versus over 65. And get them to get the sense of why does it matter if you get a representative sample rather than talking to too many people over 65 or college educated, based on the evidence that they're seeing in front of them on this assignment. And this is much easier to do because they're already on a computer in an online course. I'll have them go and look at presidential approval and track that. And so we can get a more neutral way of talking about different presidencies and approval and how people think about it and how that's changing over time. In a slightly different type of assignment than these ones where I'm doing more research skills, for my political controversies courses or my law courses, I'll often do hypotheticals, or hypos as they often talk about. And I'll create a hypo which is basically, here's a court case that's coming up. One of the ones I've been using recently, which is described here, and this will be posted on the APSA website, has to do with this court case of Masterpiece Cake Shop and David Mullins and Charlie Craig, who walk into a cake shop and say, we would like to buy a cake to celebrate our wedding. And the owner of the cake shop says, no, because I'm a Christian, I'm not going to do it, even though Colorado law says he cannot discriminate in this way. Does he get exempt from the law because he has a religious reason for doing so, and what's the First Amendment say? So I create the. Now, the court has ruled on this case, but they didn't discuss the underlying constitutional issue, so I create a issue that comes up in 2022 and say, try to solve this. And as part of the assignment, as you read through it, you'll see what I do is I put some of the students as defending David Mullins and Charlie Craig. I have some of them defending the owner of Masterpiece Cake Shop. So I have different groups, it's a group assignment. And then I'll have a different group be the Supreme Court. And they'll work through it and they'll talk about the ideas. And I go through and I'm very specific about how I don't want them to just cite precedent and say, this court says this or this previous court case. But I want them to go through, read the Constitution, think about these ideas. It's a great way to get people to work in groups, which lowers some of my workload because I only have to grade a few, like 3 grades rather than 30, because I have them in these different groups, or if I double up the groups and so forth. And I'll do this with lots of different court cases or ideas. One I've used recently was this one about Westboro Baptist Church and protesting at military funerals and this First Amendment free speech issue. And I'll create a hypo on this. I've done other hypotheticals on other religious liberty stuff related to COVID-19. I actually have a couple of colleagues who I work with, and we just share hypos that we send around. We say, oh, this is what I'm doing, and here's what I'm doing. And basically, you just have to swap out the particular fact pattern, but the idea of the assignment is always the same. One group defending one side, one group defending another side, one group being the Supreme Court. They have their roles, and you put that out. And they work amongst themselves, and they're able to organize themselves online. I actually had students I was doing this with over a summer course, and I got really nervous because I didn't see a lot of chatter happening on in the discussion board in Canvas, which I use Canvas, I use Blackboard. But they were all organizing themselves through Instagram. They found each other's Instagram accounts and they were doing it, and all that was happening. Students are incredibly adept at figuring out ways to communicate with each other, even more so than I am. And so if I simply give them the opportunity to do it, they found ways to do it and come up with really beautiful work. I think another assignment I want to send you to the website to, or explain to you, is not one that's mine, but it's a colleague that I work with, and we try to share our work back and forth. And I think it really showcases this idea of the medium as education and thinking beyond the discussion post. And what he does is, while they're doing a final paper, as part of that, he also requires them to do a podcast. So this is Professor W's guide to the podcast, Aaron Weinstein at Fairfield College. And he uses this on Fairfield College in Connecticut. And he has all of his different courses up on this website, and it all has their podcast rules. And basically what they have to do as part of this, and you can see the website here, this is the website he created for it. And on it, it says, okay, each person's going to create a 10 to 12 minute podcast that basically goes more in depth than the paper that they wrote. It talks about the particular things, what are you doing? And it asks them to get in groups and where they actually interview each other. And so they read each other's papers. They then, taking that knowledge, they ask the other person questions, and the person has to defend it, and then they produce a podcast and they upload it. Our students are very familiar with things like YouTube and creating their own videos and watching podcasts, and so having them create their own, thinking beyond the discussion post, right, and putting this information up there where they get to do this and work with others and see this, and then giving them a good rubric to do it. I'll make sure that the website is available through APSA as well. So for Professor Aaron Weinstein's great assignment that I'm really enamored with, and that I'm going to try to start using. These other assignments that I do for polling, as well as the assignments that I use for Congress, as well as those hypotheticals that I use. So we'll have these things posted up there. But this idea of, let's have some principles or some ways to think about. Let's use the medium as part of the education. Let's think beyond the discussion post. Let's go further than that. And then you can look at these assignments. Let's talk about this. You may have some additional principles beyond these, ways to use the medium to your advantage. Yes, research skills is great, coordinating groups and one-on-one meetings and reclaiming your semester. But you might have some additional principles that I should think about or ways that I can include. So here's some ready-made, off-the-shelf assignments you can just grab from the APSA website and import those into Canvas or Blackboard or whatever you're using and create them either through a quiz or an assignment tab, however you want to do that. Or you can take these and change them based on, let's think about how do I go beyond the discussion post and how do I make this more involved and interactive. So thank you for watching video number 3 of the American Political Science Association's webinar. Please be sure that you watch the other 2 videos, and we look forward to seeing you during our webinar's second part of the event, right, which will happen in January of 2021.